Hi, it's Lisa. I'm here with Wanda Costen, who is the Dean of the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Thank you so much for being here, Wanda. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and share your knowledge with our viewers.
Thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, I remember how it felt when I read the news that you were joining the Smith School of Business as Dean and reading all of your qualifications. Deeply impressive. West Point, oh my goodness. And I just, I'd love to hear a little bit about your career journey and what has gotten you to this point.
Yes, thank you for that. It's difficult sometimes because when it's you don't really think it's a big deal, right? And I will say it was my students at the University of Tennessee who, when they heard about this journey, back then I was an assistant and then associate professor, they'd say, Dr. Costen, you're part of history. And my flippant response was, no, I'm not that old. Like, come on now, right? And of course, now I look back and realize I'm the 7th class of women at West Point, right? 7th class of women that graduates with women in the class. And I think people forget the history. So this is where history is important, right? We don't throw history away, irrespective of how painful history can be. And so I think often for me, because of that experience, which as you can imagine was not easy, just for a woman, then you add on that my race as an African-American woman, and we had yet even a different experience from the white women. And I have a dear group of us who are called the Breakfast Club. They happen to be white women. And recently an African-American woman graduate wrote a piece on what it was like for her at West Point. And my friends were like, oh my God, it never occurred to us that could be worse. Like it never occurred to us that because of your race, you may have felt and experienced even more, right? So my journey is really about, I always tell people, sometimes ignorance can be a good thing because I didn't know what I was doing. I just went and did it, right? So I left the military, went into business for a decade, said yes a lot, and then for some reason decided in my early 30s to go get my PhD. That's not normal when people are doing that. They're normally coming out at that time. So I had this varied experience of the military and very different military, like coming through West Point in that leadership journey, and then business, and then going into academe. And academe was a foreign concept to me, right? I didn't know what I was doing. And had some success there, at which point I was identified for leadership positions, right? And I remember my dean saying, you're going to be a dean one day. I laughed at him like, yeah, that is not going to happen, right? And of course, when I became a dean and posted it on LinkedIn, he responded. He said, do you remember that conversation all those years ago? And I said, yes, I do. I talk about you all the time because you told me this. And I was like, that is not going to happen, right? So I think for me, the journey really was about not letting something I didn't understand or know get in the way. And in many times listening to people who knew better than I about what's needed at that level, because I just didn't see myself that way. I just didn't. And for other people to say, no, we actually need leaders like you with this kind of background here. Now I'm at Queen's. Queen's, as you know, is the pinnacle of prestige and history, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But let's be clear. I'm quite sure because of the history at Queen's and at Smith, that there are many people who think I don't tick the right boxes.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That my background is not the traditional academic background that makes these traditional journeys, right? Mm-hmm. Up the ladder, if you will, to get to this point. And yet, as I am wont to say here, instead of focusing on what I don't have, which tick boxes I don't have, how about the fact that my background, my competencies, my experiences have never existed on this campus in a senior leadership position.
Yeah.
Ever. So how about the value that brings to an amazing institution like Queens and by default Smith, as opposed to what you don't have? So that's a deficit approach as opposed to a value-added approach. And I'm just so delighted that Smith and Queens had the courage to make this decision, because they could have certainly just gone along the way they were with the usual suspects and go that route, but they have identified that perhaps we need to do things a little differently, and we might need a different kind of leader with a different kind of perspective to take us and continue on this amazing journey of where we're going as an institution, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You're uniquely qualified to really meet this moment. You know, as elite universities are facing their own bias, and, you know, often over hundreds of years, not, you know, not, this is not short-term stuff. And, you know, elite universities and Queens is most definitely one of them that's really been called to address that bias and improve inclusion and belonging. Which I think is the, you know, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, belonging is such a deeply important part of that. And I speak to that a lot in talking about women in leadership. And I really recognize that I am a white woman talking about women in leadership. And so there are, and I actually do have a hidden disability, so I have some intersectionality when it comes to that. But you know, I don't, that's something I can choose to share, or I can choose not to share, you know, those kinds of things, which just make it different in so many ways. And so I'm really interested to hear, I mean, I do want to hear about some of the negative stuff and how you've kind of dealt with it, but I also really want to hear how that intersectionality for you informs your leadership. And
well, it certainly does. I mean, I posted to something to LinkedIn, and someone happened to be a white male said, well, I hope this has no impact on your leadership, because I learned that I am the 31st Black woman graduate of West Point. 31. I graduated in 1986. West Point was founded in 1802. So talk about history, bias, right? And what I said to him in response was, well, I'm an African-American woman, and you better believe it informs my leadership. Just like people bring their lived experiences into who they are. Yeah, it informs my leadership. And frankly, my approach to leadership has not always been welcome because of the package it comes in. Right. I've had senior leaders in post-secondary, presidents, say to me, you would not be challenged on this matter if you were a white male. Literally, they saw it, because I was proposing something quite progressive, yes, but quite aligned with the future and where, right? Yeah. And this happens, right? So it really, for me, it just became, and I know people who hear me will be tired of this, it's always been about impact, Lisa. I'm not kidding you. In what ways can I create communities, not environments, communities where people can bring their authentic selves and benefit at a place like Queens and Smith, the vast amount of resources we have to create learning experiences, to develop these leaders who are going to go out and change society. That's what we're about here. We're providers of talent. And what that means is the talent today is no longer just white and male. And the talent today doesn't just go to certain schools and get certain grades. This rawness, this perseverance, this passion, it impacts organizations differently. And it allows us to operate differently. So how do we create a space where bringing that in, first of all, are we not just welcoming them in, but are we creating space for them to flourish?
Yes, right.
To flourish, right?
Yeah.
And it's about retention, not recruitment.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, young people, the traditional, let's say we're talking about the traditional university student, who might be a person of color, okay, a racialized individual, we actually pay attention to whether or not we're represented. So I have young people say to me all the time, representation. So I had someone in Smith say, literally last week, I would have never thought that there would be a dean at the Smith School of Business rocking braids, natural hair, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's humid and I wear my hair natural. This is really the only option, right?
Yeah.
Still look professional. But for some people, you undoubtedly know the organizational culture that's steeped in tradition might say this isn't professional.
The definition of what is professional has been defined by white men. And so it's coming to the point of actually redefining what professional is.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even how one conducts oneself, right? I'm not sure people pick up on this, but for African Americans, Black people, our culture, our history, I would say Latinx people as well, it's grounded in our ethnicity. So even my speech pattern and how I talk and my passion, so people would say, oh, she's yelling at us. I'm passionate. I had a dean say to me once, I've just figured out that faculty have never had a leader who's so passionate about what they do. So they don't know how to deal with that. They're just used to someone like, okay, here's how we go. And you're just like, well, of course we can do that. Yes, let's go, right? And he's like, they don't know how to take you. They don't know how to categorize you. They just don't know how to deal with you. Well, this is just who I am. And so to your point where we're talking about inclusion, the question becomes, you heard me say authentic self, because actually often what organizations are doing, the infamous fit, right? So what they're doing is they're saying, yes, I want to bring that in, but then they do everything to squash you and mold you to fit back into who they are. So I'm very proud and honored that Queens and Smith saw that they had something different and a different type of leader that they too must believe is right for this moment in time, and I believe I am. Mm-hmm. But that also means I'm going to rub up against the traditions of Queens and how we operate, because I'm going to say, I thought the point was not to continue down this path. I thought the point, and we have a great principle, to head this way. Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. So we can't keep going down this path with the same way we've been operating in the same traditions. There are some traditions we need to hold dear and serve as the foundation for how we leap off. And there are other traditions, unfortunately, we need to let go. And we know this in our organizations, that there are traditions that have discriminated, that have kept people out, that have been exclusionary, not inclusion. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at one level, if I could, one of the things we have to be careful of is that we have so socialized, certainly in post-secondary, what a good academic is, that it strips away our ethnicity and the parts that make us different. I'm the same, so we produce the same academic with a different hue and a different sex. That is not diversity, because you've so constrained our thought to fit into this mold so we can be accepted and get a tenure track job, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So we have to shift that up. Yeah. If we're serious about inclusion. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about it in the young women that I coach and interact with, and how often when we start to look at, what are the barriers that are holding them back, often they're taking their whole self and cutting off all these pieces of their self to try to fit. And instead of looking at, what is it that I bring?
right? And I think that for so many women, you know, we have this very narrow range of acceptable behaviors, and it is much narrower than for men.
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, I suspect that the line that that women of color are walking cuts their feet. It's so sharp,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You know, like you can't be angry and you can't be passionate and you can't be, and it's like, okay, wait a second, you know, how do we open up the range of acceptable behaviors in leadership to include all these things that are frankly wonderful about people who are not, identified male at birth and raised in this specific way, and have these specific set of experiences.
I
How do we
think you're
crack
on
that
point.
open?
I think you're on point, right? I've actually been saying we need to widen the aperture, right? Right.
Mhm.
The array of talent we're looking for, raw talent, is vast today, and they've had different experiences. And we have to acknowledge that some of the people we're targeting aren't well positioned yet because they didn't have that opportunity to get those skills. It's not that they're incapable, they didn't have the same opportunity. And if they were able to be this successful given this, do you not think they can transfer those skills and experiences over here and continue that trajectory, right?
Yeah.
So when people talk about, oh, we're not going to lower our standards, I'm like, I didn't say anything about lowering standards. I'm talking about what are the metrics and information we're gathering, and how do we measure that and assess it? How do we evaluate it? That's what I'm saying. We gotta change how we evaluate and the kinds and vast array of information that we're asking for to make the assessment.
Yes.
That's what changes, right?
Yes.
And that is a broader array than it used to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It presents a challenge, obviously in recruiting for programs at the biz school, but also in organizations, because so much of hiring has been based on fit, and this perception of what fit is, and even what qualifications look for. I remember when I did my MBA, I was still hiding the fact that I have ADHD. And I mean, I don't just have a mild case of ADHD. I have like, whew, right? And I remember talking to someone about this dirty little secret that I had, and how if people found out, how I would be perceived. And she said, it's amazing to me, Lisa, that you think that your accomplishments would be seen as less amazing, less wonderful, if it was known that you had ADHD, right?
Wow.
And it's actually the first person who's ever sort of acknowledged that. And I think that so often our experiences of being different aren't actually particularly valued, because they don't look the same. They don't look like, the elite level, elite undergrad degree and the job at Microsoft and or Google or something, right? And it's like the path can look very different, and yet those different paths bring a lot of value as well.
Well, that's the key, right?
Mm.
And in fact, sometimes you have to have the courage to say, in spite of all I've had to experience, I'm successful. Where would I be had I not had to overcome your perceptions of adequacy?
Yes, right.
Right. It's
right.
in spite of, right? So people will say, oh, that's the diversity hire, or she was hired at this point in time because she's African-American female whose own personal research happens to focus on what we now refer to equity, diversity, inclusion, indigeneity. Really, because we've had a legacy of hiring a particular type of person, and we didn't think they were hired because of that, but they were, right? Mm-hmm. So how about that she accomplished this in spite of all those challenges and perceptions?
Yes, right.
Right?
Right.
So it's a shift. And I would argue, as someone with an HR background, we have to begin to talk about what are the core competencies we're seeking and what is the information we need to measure those, because all this other stuff is superfluous, frankly, right? It's really about, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for. And any organization who's about thinking entrepreneurially, about being creative and innovative, anyone who's recognizing the vast speed of change and disruption today would want the best talent, irrespective of what package it shows up in. Because it is only through those experiences that you get this leaping up part, right? There's tons of research that shows with this, though, that with a common purpose and common values, heterogeneous, diverse, different groups outperform homogeneous, i.e. the same groups all the time, especially when the task is complex and the answer is not readily available, but the impact is high. So if that were the case, you would always be looking for the outlier that would catapult your team to the next level.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. And it's letting go of the shortcuts that we've always used, right?
For sure, it's
this
far more
person
difficult.
Feels just like me, therefore, just doesn't cut it.
And it's quite difficult in communications, right? You say, so this has happened for me. I said one word, which is actually a word that is commonly used in HR, but it has a different connotation in this context, in this culture. People say, well, when you said that, people were afraid. They thought they were going to be fair. I'm like, I never said that. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I never said that. I go, you do know what this word means in HR. I mean, we're a business school. We teach this stuff, right? And they go, well, yeah, but that's not how it's been enacted here. I said, okay, so then what term should I use? Because this word is actually the right word.
Yeah.
Okay, I can change that, but here's what I mean by that. And I think the other pieces are discomfort with seeking clarification. So if you said something, I'm a US citizen, so this happens to me a lot in Canada. Someone will say something, I'm like, I don't understand what that means. What are you talking about, right? They'll say something shorthand, or they'll say, so I'm new to Queens and Smith, and I moved from Alberta. And in my first few weeks and month, still to the day, I'm reaching out to different people to meet them and understand this thing I call the Smith Enterprise, right? Which is phenomenal. Immense talent. Oh my God, we're just amazing. We're amazing. So I'm trying to understand how to get my arms around all the things we do, right? And I kept hearing people say, oh, like for advisory board or what have you, key stakeholders, oh, and then Bay Street, right? I kept hearing Bay Street. And I'm like, what the heck is Bay Street? Like, I had no clue. I had to Google it. I'm like, oh, that's Canada's Wall Street. Okay, I got it now.
Yeah.
How would I know that? But the shorthand and the assumption that somehow I would just know that Bay Street in Toronto is the US and New York's Wall Street. I didn't know that, right? And then our discomfort, myself, in saying, I'm sorry, what's Bay Street? Because surely the new dean at Smith ought to know what Bay Street is, right? So I'm not going to out myself because again, and why would I not out myself? Because I'm different than the traditional elite business school dean. And I feel personally, this is strictly me, that clearly I have to outperform and I have to be all knowing and I have to get everything right. I can't make any mistakes. Because it's a risk on me, right? So I cannot say, I don't know what Bay Street is. I got to go figure that out on my own.
Yeah. Because heaven forbid you should not know something, but I think there's real, this is a struggle. And I even in workshops that I do, sort of helping women to deal with their inner critic and all of that kind of thing, we're really talking about often dealing with some counterproductive behaviors that are just working against them in where they want to be. And you know, the inner critic is great at keeping us small and that sort of thing. And you know, one of the things that I'm always quick to say is, I can't guarantee you how this is going to be received, right? Because there is a certain bravery in saying, I don't know what you're talking about, or in whatever step, just putting your neck out and taking that risk. And it's not always well received. More often than not, it winds up being better received than you think. And I think that's where, you know, those internalized gender bias that we have, where we, you know, it's like, oh, this is the acceptable behavior, and maybe it's actually here. Right? It's actually a little wider than we think it is, but we try to make sure we stay within it. But you know, what I often think about is, what's the cost to staying within those boundaries, to yourself, right? And not only what is the benefit of really being willing to kind of step outside of that, but what's the cost of not doing that? But that's still, you know, I still have stomach aches about speaking up and, you know, about certain things that I'm like, and I wind up saying, well, I have to, because I coach women to do this. So I have a responsibility to step outside my comfort zone. So I would probably hide under my bed a lot more often if I didn't have the role that I have. But it's not easy. It's not easy.
No, it isn't. But it's also about, if we believe that we can add value to any organization, any entity, it could be government, nonprofit, for-profit, really any entity, we're actually doing a disservice to the organization if we clip our own wings.
Yes.
Right? So I work with an executive coach, and his common mantra is, you know what to do, go do it.
Yeah.
Because we'll say things, well, I can't do that because then this is going to come up. Then they're going to say that. I'm sorry. You know what to do, go do it.
Yeah.
Go do it. And if we're really going to have an impact, we have to do that, right? And so it really is about, well, what am I about? What are my core values? What am I trying to accomplish? And that's the space we need to stay in to launch forward. Because if it's the status quo, I mean, I confess, I said that here in the early stages of the process, like, if y'all aren't serious, just tell me now, because I'm not going through these motions. It's a lot of energy. At some point, if I make it to the next levels, I'm going to get excited, and then I'm going to do what I'm not supposed to do, which is to actually visualize myself there. And then I'm going to be in trouble. But if y'all aren't serious, just tell me now. Like, people always say they want to change agent. No, you don't. You actually want things to stay the same. But if you're serious, at this moment in time, what this institution and organization is going through, I'm a fit. Okay, so let's have that conversation.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the only way you get to that point, though, is being, I think, very self-aware of what your values are, and more importantly, how you can contribute to this entity, whatever it is, right? And what you bring to the table that enhances and allows this entity to blossom, right? And I actually look at it now as, and if I don't do that, I actually am not fulfilling my end of this bargain that said, this is what I was going to bring. I can't now get here and revert back to your point to be in the box or on the lane. I actually have to stay in my lane and say, this is who I am. This is who I told you I would be. This is how I said I would move forward. And I am doing that. And at least I've been transparent in the process that said, this is what I'm about, and these are the things I will do. So there should be no miscommunication about that. So I think people actually want us deep down to do what we say we're going to do, even though they recognize that's going to take them out of their own comfort zones.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because I've been thinking about, I've just done a couple of videos recently about interviewing skills and that sort of thing, because I think that's something, if you can't get through the interview because of being intimidated or whatever, it's tough, right? But again, it's sort of like we think about, how do I perform in the interview? And I think you've just expressed it so beautifully. If you perform in the interview, you're going to be performing, for the rest of the time that you're in that role. Whereas if you show up to the interview, then you have the basis to say, this is who I said I was, and now I'm consistent with that. And isn't that so much more powerful? And if you show up and they say you're not who we want, then you're not who they want. And, I mean, I recognize for a lot of people, it's like, but I need a job, right? And so that puts a different pressure on it. But when you're looking at career movements, you've nailed it. Like that's an amazing example of that.
And I would push it farther and say, if you're not your authentic self and you presented this facade, and we've all done that to a degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
You presented this facade, then that was disingenuous because they hired the facade.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they got somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the traditional bait and switch, right?
Yeah.
So you're so right. And I would still say, I think the key for women in general, and certainly those of us who are racialized, is to recognize, to have done your homework about, I spend a lot of time understanding the organizations I think I want to join. And I spend a lot of time understanding, given this, if this is accurate. So people forget that while you're being interviewed, if you're really smart, you're interviewing them.
100%.
Right? This is a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've done your due diligence to really understand, where are they? What are they doing? What are they about? I'm looking to say, how would I add value to that? And even though it may be a really nice place and a really great place to work, if I can't quickly identify how what I bring adds value, despite the fact I want to work there, that's actually not a fit.
Yeah, right. I was actually in a previous interview that I did, we were talking about the aiming higher than what you feel you're qualified for. And I mean, she was saying, like, if you've got 30 or 40%, like, go for it, because you need to look at it and really step into those opportunities. But what we were talking about was, actually, if you're at 100%, then walk away, because you have no room for growth.
That's right.
In that role. And so how quickly are you becoming frustrated and stuck feeling, and all of those kinds of things too. So it really is about both how you're adding value and what is there for you in your growth too.
Well, and it's having the courage. I had a friend, she's a dear friend from West Point. And she said, Wanda, I'm just so impressed that you have the courage to put yourself out there, right? Because you get a lot of no's. I've had a lot of no's. But the cool thing is, I develop new skills. Oh, that's a good way to answer that question. I messed that up, right? Oh, I got to use that. Hadn't thought about that, right? And here's the other tidbit I will tell folks. Always pay attention and go back. Most people won't do this because they don't want to know. But I always go back and find out who got the job. Mm-hmm. And then I look at that bio, the big announcement, they have the bio. And when I look at that bio, that tells me that's why I didn't get that job.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Sometimes that bio tells me, oh, wow, yeah, they're way ahead of me. Okay, that's fair. But sometimes the bio tells me, oh, well, clearly they were looking for this kind of person. That's not me. So I would not have been successful there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a
And
check
how
and
do
balance
you,
for yourself.
right, right. And, I think about some of the women, and I mean, being earlier in their leadership career is different. I mean, we're both in our 50s, and I think there's just that I never thought I was going to enjoy being in my 50s. When I was 20, it seemed really old, but I love it because there is just so much of just knowing who I am and being much more comfortable with that. But I know that for lots of women earlier in their careers, not getting the job is such
Mhm.
it turns completely on to themselves, right? And so how do you, when you have that disappointment or you look at that, how do you keep from sort of shaming yourself about it?
Yeah, so the first thing is I'm bummed. I mean, I'm a very emotional person, so I'm like, oh man, I really wanted that job, right?
Mhm.
But then I pay attention to, what did I learn? What did this experience teach me? Almost always it reveals an area that I need to develop. So let's go fix that, right? I don't mean fix it, but let's go develop in this area. Sometimes it reveals for me, if you're honest with yourself, there were aspects of that role that you really didn't want. You probably did it because of its prestige or its title or what company it's with. So I always check myself on that. Well, really, you wanted that job because it was Microsoft, right? But it wasn't the aspect that you thought is normally you, right? Or
Yes.
you wanted that job because it's in California, right? Something like that. There's always a driver, right? Um, and then I have to say, I'm a deeply religious woman and spiritual, but I really am religious. I don't like that word because it connotes Bible toter to me. I'm not a Bible toter, but my faith is very important to me.
Mhm.
So I'm always thinking, clearly that is not where you're supposed to go, and something else is coming. So how do I get more prepared for the next thing? And how do I learn and develop more so that my next CV is even stronger than this CV?
Right. Right.
And maybe my work here isn't done. So what am I supposed to be doing here, right now, that is going to prepare me in unknown ways for the future, right?
Yes.
In what ways? So, and then when you're focused on that, stuff starts coming at you in a different way, and you just have a different perspective on it, right? But it's like I tell students, every experience adds value. Like when students used to say things, they'll say things like, oh, I didn't even have to take that class. Okay, first of all, it's not like you didn't learn something in a class just because it didn't contribute to literally the program by ticking off a box on your degree, right? As you're progressing towards your degree. You learned from that class. What are you going to take from that course to add value to the entire learning experience and maybe differentially position you for something later in your life that you can't even think about right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it also has to be this notion of, what did I learn from this experience? Like for real, I literally say, what did I learn from this experience, right? Sometimes it's, I now have extended my network. And if you've managed that interview process well, you're connected to those people now. How do I deepen those relationships, which might open doors to something else, right? Because there's nothing that says you were a no for this role, but if it's a really large company, someone may have said, oh, we interviewed someone, man, you should go call this person, or stuff will get sent to you. If it's a recruiter, you've met a recruiter, they know your background, they may tap you for other jobs moving forward because they know you now.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that, what do you need to learn from it? And the saying, when you ask the universe for patience, you get a line up at the bank. There really is something to be learned from even negative experiences, and and there's character building in that
Yes.
as well, but also more tangible things to be gained as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're I always tell people, I'm a work in progress.
Mhm.
And thank goodness for that.
Yep. Yep.
And everything, even the negative, I'm not always good at this, but even the negative, what was I supposed, well, that was painful. What am I supposed to learn? But how did that teach me something? What did that, even the experiences I've had as a racialized woman, right?
Mhm.
I realized, gosh, probably 8 years ago now, when I moved into leadership, that my passion around certain things is because I was mistreated, and I will not allow that to happen in my area of responsibility. I have no tolerance for it. None.
Mhm.
It was because of how I was treated, right? So a lot of the decisions and things I make that have defined my leadership are to ensure that no one has to have those experiences again.
Yes.
To make it fair and equitable and transparent, right? To be approachable, to recognize that I have a responsibility to coach and mentor others,
Mhm.
right? Well, that's where it comes from. I didn't have all that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's yeah, it's almost that sense of um it, using the power of those negative experiences to make change,
Yes.
right? um yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think um it's funny because it's taken me a long time, and like I said, getting into my 50s is like has been it's such a great experience of like, oh, all these realizations. But um there have certainly been times in my life where I've looked back over my life and gone, oh, I wish things had been different, and all these things that I think, oh, what if I hadn't had this issue, or what if my family had been more well off, or any of those kinds of things. And then I go, well, I wouldn't be here. Like, this is not where I would have wound up. I would have wound up somewhere else, because I would have wound up as a different person.
Yes.
Right. So, there are certainly experiences in my past where I think I'd be happy to do without that. And then I go, ooh, but would I be happy to do without what I gained from that, what I learned from that? And then it's like it suddenly becomes this multiverse kind of idea of, oh, but I don't know without that experience who I would be or where I would have wound up. And so I don't want to change that. And so, yeah, my time machine would sit gathering dust right now, despite the fact that I might fantasize about going back and changing things.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
absolutely the right approach.
So if I could give you a time machine, not what would you go back and change, but if you could go back and talk to your younger self early in this journey, as you were stepping into your first leadership role, maybe, or early in the journey, is there something you would want to impart to that younger
Absolutely.
self?
It's easy. That's easy. Stop worrying so much about what other people think. You got this.
Yeah.
That's what it would be. I spent a lot of time thinking about, oh, could I, what? Be you. Just be you. Show up fully as yourself and stop worrying so much about what other people think. You got this.
Yeah.
That's what it would be. Very,
Yeah.
very easy.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I feel like we haven't even really had a chance to talk about, your research and all of that kind of thing. And I'm happy to, if there's anything more that you want to say, I'm happy to hear it, but I'm also just thrilled with the conversation that we've just had.
Well, thank you. I think for me, it's about, look, none of us get to these positions alone. So I find young women, if I've been fortunate to be a keynote speaker or on a panel, and I resonate with someone, when I was younger, I would have never reached out to someone like me. Like, I just like, yeah, they don't care about me. What I would say is, for young people, if you, for some reason, participated in some event, one day, God willing, we'll be live, and something that person said touched you, moved you, inspired you, and you thought, I'd really like to get some of that person's time, reach out to them. Because most of us really take seriously the desire to help develop others, because that wasn't there for us, right? And even if they're, mean people, at least you know, oh, I did my part. I don't want to play coulda, woulda, shoulda anymore, right? So it really has to be around, have the courage to reach out, tell the person in particular what it is that resonated, and be clear about what you would like. Because I have a lot of mentors, and I'm always worried about how much time I'm taking for them, because they're incredibly successful people. But I have found that because I have an array, I don't have to overtap any one of them. And I compartmentalize around, okay, with this topic, I think I'm going to go to this person. And I reach out to them and say, I'd like to talk to you about XYZ. I'd love 30 minutes of your time. I'll take 20. And it happens. And then I show up and literally say, thanks for meeting me. I really appreciate it. Here's the issue. Here's what I'm thinking. Can you help me? And it's in and it's done. And what I realize now that I'm on the other side of that is the tremendous gratitude I feel in being able to help another individual and go, wow. Because to me, in the African-American culture, we have a saying, each one, teach one. So to me, I'm reaching down and flinging them ahead of me, right?
Yeah.
So that they don't have the same issues, because they're just going to catapult over that.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to help them see, don't worry about this. Boom, let me launch you over, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is I still have several mentors that I reach out to for a variety of reasons, some of which are peers even, right? To help. And I have some that are faculty that I'm like, help me understand, because, I'm a dean now. So how would you feel about this as a faculty member, right? And they put me in my place. Oh, clearly you've been a dean too long. Let me tell you how that would go over, right? I'm like, okay, note to self. Thank you for that, right?
Yeah.
So you need all that input, and to try to be kind to yourself. Like you said, that inner critic. I read a book once that said that voice that's in your head, and I always tell people, don't act like you don't have a voice in your head, but you have a voice in your head that talks to you, right? If that was a live person outside your body, you would not be friends with it.
Yes.
So why are you listening to that?
Totally.
Like, go away, right? I literally go away. I'm not talking to you, right? Go away, right? Or go for a walk, right? Clear your head.
Yeah.
But really, so recognize that everyone has a mentor. Everyone asks for help, right? And we don't have it all figured out. We just don't. And nor should we. Nor should we. We're supposed to be evolving.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I think that what I notice is this need to not only to know what questions that you want to ask, but that there's a performative aspect to that. And it's helping young people when they're trying to gain those mentorships and have those conversations, to leave the performing aside and to allow it to be a real conversation.
Yes.
Which means asking the real questions that you really want to know, not the ones that when you Google that they say, ask these 5 questions, right? What do you really want to know? What are you really struggling with? What is this really about? And that can be so hard when there's that sense that, the world is just ready to judge you and throw you aside in some way.
Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I sort of feel like I would like to plan for part 2.
I'd happily do it. It's been great for me. I'd happily do it. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
And If you have any questions about the conversation that you've just heard, please leave them in the comments or send me a direct message. And if you have questions for Wanda, I am sure that she would be really happy to answer them. So send them to me and I'll make sure she gets them. Please put a comment and let me know what really resonated for you about this conversation. I would love to hear more. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.